As demonstrations over police brutality erupt across the United States, Amnesty International is reporting a rise in officers responding with tear gas, rubber bullets, and other forceful tactics. President Trump has pushed for local officials to get tougher on protesters, but Amnesty says the excessive force and the show of force is acting as a deterrent for the peaceful right to protest. Let's bring End Gun Violence campaign manager at Amnesty International, Ernest Coverson, to help break this down. I guess, Ernest, the first question is, what is the responsibility of law enforcement towards the peaceful assembly, which is protected under the Constitution, the right to assemble? What is the responsibility of law enforcement towards those protesters?
Yeah, the responsibility, good morning. The responsibility of the police is to protect, de-escalate to protect and de-escalate those peaceful protesters, to making sure that there is no outside agitators that's interfering with that peaceful protest. But then if there are peaceful protests, if there is agitation that goes on, that they de-escalate that situation before going to the resort of, rubber bullets and tear gas and et cetera.
So what is your concern about police departments having these options, rubber bullets, tear gas? What is it that you're seeing today or over the past few days that is the most concerning to you?
What we're seeing is that, it's becoming the first resort instead of the last resort. As stated, the police should be looking to de-escalate these situations versus going into a combative type of situation. That they should be having communication with protesters, building that relationship with protesters before they go into this combative and pushing, shoving, shooting these tear gas. And especially in the midst of COVID, individuals are wearing masks. And so this is just escalating things where they should be looking to de-escalate things.
Ernest, can you explain to our viewers what has fundamentally changed with police departments across the country in the last, let's say, 20 years or so? It's not lost on me that when I was a kid growing up, that, police officers wore a uniform and they had a badge and they had a gun, but there was not an overt militarized look to the way they presented themselves to the public. In other words, they weren't wearing cargo pants and tactical shirts, and
Right.
Their utility belts have gotten more complicated with a bunch of attachments to them that really make them feel as if they are in a military. Plus, there's the use, and we've talked about this in the past, of the usage of military titles like sergeant, lieutenant, captain. Whereas, for example, in the UK and some other countries, they use inspector, chief superintendent,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera. Where are they getting this equipment, the armored vehicles that they're using, the heavy weaponry? Where are they getting those materials?
Well, a lot of times, over this past most recent years, they have been receiving that from a surplus from the military. After the reduction of the wars of wars after 9/11, many of the militaries allow for police departments to come and either auction off, purchase, obtain these type of military equipment to now take back to these small and even larger, but even and small police departments. And so over these 20 years, as you stated, this entire militaristic view of what the police department should be, and versus being part of communities, talking to community members, being part of these protesters, having communication with them, they're resulting to this. And so they feel, in my mind, that they need to be this military type force, and that's going to deter things. And as we see over this weekend, it has not deterred. It just intensifies the situations from across the country.
So, Ernest, I want to give people some tips, news that they can actually use. They're going to head out, they're going to protest, as is their right. How do protesters do so safely? And what do they need to know about their rights as protesters?
And that right there, they have the right to protest. That is a fundamental human right to protest, and but they should be safe, most definitely. We want to make sure that they are taking care of themselves in the midst of the pandemic, that they are, covering up. We know we can't do the social distancing, but making sure that they are at least wearing a mask, making sure that they have escape routes if need be, that they are, if they do decide to film, that they tell the location in the film where they are at the time. So if we have to do any backtracking, we can most definitely be able to track back where they are and what time that was as well. Being covered as much as possible as well as they go out to do, to go out and participate in the protests.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, Ernest, let me just ask you again, I'm fascinated by this theme of a militarized police force, even though statistically across this country, crime is going down. Example, in New York City, when I think back to the bad old days, the 1970s and the early 1980s, the crack epidemic, and police officers in New York City, what did they have? They had a .38, which holds 6 bullets, 6 rounds, and a nightstick. And,
Right.
That was what they were out there. That's how they were armed with bulletproof vests, obviously, to take on this epidemic. You're talking about going back, 50 years in this country, in Chicago, St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and Al Capone. Again, police officers are walking the beat with a nightstick and a revolver. And as crime has gone down, we've seen police departments across the country increasing their weaponry, increasing the number of heavy machinery that they take into the street. That is something that I don't understand. Can you explain it to us?
It is unexplainable, actually. I mean, I think that we have to really examine examine what police forces are doing, and that's why we're looking for that police needs to be reformed, and that it needs to be reformed with the human rights lens that goes around with the international human rights law on how you do policing. But I think as well, more importantly, as budgets have increased for those police forces, we have to look at that funding for those community-based organizations that are helping to de-escalate those issues in those communities. And I think that's the piece that has been missing or has been deprioritized, is that funding that helped to curb that violence in those communities, as you were stating. And so as we increase that funding for those police officers and police forces, we decrease the funding for those community organizations that help to bring down that crime across the country.
All right, Ernest Coverson. Thank you very much, Ernest. We appreciate it.
Thank you.